Here we are.
Okay. There you are.
Okay, so let's get you. All right, so where are you going to sit? What's comfortable sitting? And then I'm going to put the computer around what's comfortable for you. Is that comfortable?
I'm comfortable.
Okay.
If it's all right with them.
Yeah, we're just trying to get you.
I don't care.
I just want your pretty necklace in there because it looks so nice on you. Is that good?
That's good.
Okay, she's good to go.
Okay, that was a wonderful birthday greeting you gave, and I wonder if you want to just read it again for this longer one and then go into your other interview.
You would like for me to read it again? All right.
Why don't you read it again, and then after that, we'll do the other parts, okay?
All right. Dearest Colonel Halverson, also known as the Candy Bomber, you are here to be honored on the 100th birthday in your life. Few individuals become an icon during their lifetime. We are indeed privileged to celebrate this day with you. Remembering when you arrived in Berlin Tempelhof, landing near the other runway, you walked up the embankment where all the children were standing by the fence. You had an almost inspirational look on your face. I will always remember that unusual expression, which seems like you had just received a message from somewhere. Reaching into your pocket, you pulled out 2 sticks of chewing gum, which you tore into small pieces and handed to the children standing around you. We, with the assistance of a person, you explained to us that you would be back again soon and that you would wiggle your wings as a signal so that the waiting children could come to pick up that promised chocolate. And that was the operation, the beginning of the Operation Little Wings. Little Wiggles. I'm sorry. You want to do that again? The strange expression on your face must have been brought about when the Savior blessed you with a calling to find lost and needy children in your life. And you traveled all over Berlin and many other places in the world where those children, like myself, benefited from you. We became changed and uplifted because you gave us hope. And hope is what we needed more than anything after all those horrendous years. Thank you to our beloved Savior for sending you, and you brought us the hope for our future. Happy, happy 100th birthday, and God's love and blessings to you and your family always.
So grateful to you for those comments. And you saw those children waiting for the next load of flour to come down from the sky and delivered to their neighborhood. Just joy filled my heart. And I thought, why not give them some chocolate? He had something to eat, why would give them some chocolate? And that's when I started the chocolate drops, the candy drops.
And how very ingenious you were to come up with that idea and to drop the candy from the sky. And I know that all your comrades gave you their hankies and their chocolate ration, and then they started dropping. But nobody has ever forgotten. In Berlin, nobody has ever forgotten, not you, because the children told their children and they told their children, just as I did. And we love you because you are a wonderful, brave, loving man.
Thank you so much.
Ingrid, were you one of the children at the fence the first time?
I was at the fence the first time. Yes.
Can you tell a little bit about what you remember about the blockade? What was your condition at the time, you and your family?
Our condition at that time was one of total despair, because the Russians at the Potsdam Conference were supposed to divide Berlin into 4 sectors, but they didn't allow the Americans to come in, nor the British, nor the French. So finally, after a lot of back and forth, we found a way to allow the Americans to come in, but there still wasn't any food. So I went on the black market and I traded, and once in a while I even sold some little trinkets from my grandmother's belongings, so we could go and get some food. And then came the airlift, and we didn't have to worry about it anymore. And you know, I compare my time in America right now very much like that time of waiting for the Americans to take over their sector and to do their job. And your father flew endlessly. There was no rest. And can you imagine, he was sitting up during the night, nodding the little parachutes. And in the beginning, they were the handkerchiefs from the other soldiers. And then they used the twine, and then they fastened the little chocolate bars. And then pretty soon, first he got into trouble because he wasn't supposed to do it. But you know, your dad, he's wonderful. And when he sees a child, in need, he is there. And he loves them all, and they love him all. And I know there are people in Berlin that call me long distance sometimes, and they ask how he is doing, especially with the virus, because they said we could not imagine our life without the candy bomb. So yes, I was there. And I remember going hungry, hungry, hungry. We didn't even have water. If it hadn't been for the American soldiers, the veterans, we wouldn't have even had water. They made sure we got water. And then the Russians cut off the electricity. The company that provided the electricity for West Germany, West Berlin, was in the east. And then we were sitting in the dark, and we got 1 hour of electricity every day. So you know you can't do much in 1 hour. But the food. I went on the black market. I made friends with American soldiers. They came and fixed our big cooking. We had a big copper kettle in the wash kitchen. They came and fixed it. And then my mother and I did the laundry for the American soldiers. And in return, we got peanut butter and jelly. And once in a while, we got a bread. And it was wonderful. And then I discovered that when they made the coffee, they just poured it through the paper, the filters, one time, and then they threw it away. So I snitched all those paper containers and took them home. And my mother would roast them again. And we made little paper bags. And we made the re-roasted coffee grounds. And we sold it on the black market.
That's was neat.
That's how I got the money to go to Tempelhof, because Tempelhof was the first streetcar that was going all the way through Berlin. And I had 3 friends and that came with me. And I had enough money from selling my coffee on the black market so we could pay for using the streetcar.
That's wonderful. What you did to survive is incredible.
Oh, what we did. We ate dandelion soup. It's very good when you have enough of it. But if you don't have any milk or any potatoes, you know, you have to eat a lot of soup and then you bloat. And we were hungry for real meals. And then you came. You came with the Berlin Airlift. And then we had food. Then we had food.
Ingrid, how old were you at the time?
I was 10 and a half, and I was walking up that path to the fence where the children were standing, 10 and a half. It was a very difficult time. And we survived.
Can you tell about your family? Your family, how many children were there, and what about your parents? Did both parents survive?
Well, my father came from Russia. German people went to Russia in the 1700s. And so they lived over there for a long time. And then the Bolsheviks took over and they wanted all the Germans to go to other parts of Russia. So my great-grandfather took the family and brought them to Berlin. And that's how my mother met my dad. And that whole family, after they settled, they all went into the police department. And my dad then volunteered to go into World War I. And in World War I, he got mustard gas poisoning. And he had to come home. And then after he came home, he got very, very sick. And I wasn't allowed to go near him. And I would sit in a chair nearby and talk to him a little bit. And he was just wrinkling up and turning yellow and moaning and groaning. And then he passed away. And then after that, I had no other brothers or sisters. So I was all alone. And then my grandma and my grandpa, which really became my parents, took me into their home. And that's where I spent most of my time.
What happened to your mother?
My mother worked for a phone company, and she lost her job, of course, during the last part of the war and the early part of the war. So my mother went and did laundry for people that needed help. And she took care of older people because we didn't have any men. They were all in the war or in camps. And most of them were in Russia, in the coal mines. My brother was 17 years old when the Nazis drafted him to come into the army and go to Stalingrad. He went to Stalingrad on a train, and on the way there, he stopped where I had been evacuated in East Germany, living with families there. That's where I met the gentleman that invented the helicopter. Remember, I had to talk to him in letter form, and they locked me in a bread machine and walked away, and I almost died. They hated the Berliners because East Germany didn't have any food. It didn't have any men to do the work. They lived very difficult lives. So when they sent all of us Berliner kids to East Prussia to be protected from the bombing, the existence in East Prussia was almost more difficult than living in Berlin and enduring the bombing. But anyway, my brother was in a coal mine. They caught him from Stalingrad, and he and 4 friends were working in a coal mine. And it was so terrible. And then they were moving them to another mine. And the boys dug a hole in the snow real fast and hid under the snow until all the marching men were gone. And then they dug a hole in the ground, and that's where they stayed to stay warm. And then they started walking from their camp to the other end of Russia. And it took them several weeks to get to Austria. And we thought, my mother thought for sure my brother was dead. But my grandma and I didn't believe it because I could feel him. I could feel him. He was still alive, and he was only 17 when he was drafted. No boot camp. So anyway, one night I had a very bad infection in my heel, and there was a knock on the door. That was years later, and my mother had really given up on my brother. And I had an infection, and I was supposed to go to the hospital the next day. And I heard that knock on the door, and I yelled to my mother. I said, "That's Wolfgang. That's my brother. He's coming home." Excuse me. And she says, "I wish you would quit saying that. It hurts me every time you say it." And she went to open the door, and I heard her screaming and screaming and screaming. And I went back to bed, and I said, "I told you so," because I know my brother had come home. So that's, and his feet were all frozen from walking in the snow for so many miles. So we had to take him to the hospital. In the meantime, my sore was getting better. So that's my one and only brother. And he lived.
Incredible.
Yeah. Beautiful.
Really fantastic
Beautiful.
what you've done.
You know, I often wonder what would have happened if President Truman wouldn't have put his foot down and said, "The Potsdam Conference called for 4 sectors in Berlin, and you are living in the American sector, and you have to know the Americans were, well, I hadn't seen them at that time, but the Russian soldiers were very dirty and very mean, and they abused the females from the age of 8 to 80. And many of them, after they had abused them, they would just shoot them because they didn't know what else to do with them. And my future stepfather had buried my mother and myself in the basement of a very big bombed out house. And that's where we stayed during that horrible time. And when we came out from under there, we didn't know what to do because there still wasn't any food. And all of a sudden, there was a truck, a Jeep, an American Jeep, driving into the Russian-occupied area. And there was an American soldier, and he spoke German, and he says, "Come on out of the basements, come on out of the dungeons, come on out and go home. We are now the rulers in the American sector, and you will have a better life." And indeed we did. Indeed we did. President Truman made sure that we had one hot meal of soup at school every day, and once a week we got a candy bar. There's that candy again. I never got mine. I had to give it to my mother's future husband because she said he needed it more than I did. But the best part was the airlift. The best part was when you wonderful, wonderful men came, risking your life, existing on 3 hours of sleep every night. And then you ran out of handkerchiefs. And then you ran out of chocolate bars and candy. And then the Hershey Company heard about what was happening in Germany, and they donated tons of chocolate and sent it to Germany. And then we would get the soup once a day, and on Friday we would get soup and a candy bar. But it was cold. It was so cold. And we never knew what to do for heating. People started cutting down trees just to get heat in the houses. And sometimes when you came out in the morning, you would see people sitting in the streets, and they looked like stone figurines because they had frozen to death. And they couldn't go anywhere because all the houses were bombed out. Yes, those were tough times. But we were very lucky. We had rabbits, and we had hidden them in the basement. So I would go and cut greenery, and then we would feed the rabbits, and once in a while we would butcher a rabbit. We also had a goat, and the goat got sick, and then they butchered him, and I never had to buy it because he was my pet. Funny how that happens. Diane, do you have any more questions? Denise, I'm sorry.
It's okay. So you've already spoken about what the airlift meant to you and your family.
It was our life.
Mhm.
They saved 20.5 million West Berliners from starving to death. They made sure we had flour, we had sugar, my introduction to brown sugar, and peanut butter. I never knew there was such a thing as peanut butter. And I said, how does peanut butter grow on trees? And then they explained it to me. And they had a wonderful thing. They called it ice cream powder, where the billets would make ice cream for the soldiers. And once in a while, I could get a bag of that. And that was the best stuff. Oh yes, you learned how to get around. And I I was not afraid, and I knew all the shortcuts. And when we were in that bombed out house, there were lots of rats, and my mother was terrified. And then I got brave enough because I wondered, where were the rats going? Rats only go where there's food. So I followed the rats and the rat dirt. And then I found a cabinet full of canned vegetables, canned fruit, and jam. And I took a basket from the wall and I filled it with the jam and the canned fruit. And we were so thirsty because we had no water down there. And we were down there for over a week. And I took it back to my mother, and by now she had caught pneumonia, I could tell, from the way she was coughing, and she was so hot. And I always had flashlights, and I had a flashlight with me down there. And she was sitting there on her makeshift bed and crying. And she says, I'm so hungry. I'm so thirsty. What are we going to do? And I said, Mother, close your legs. I have something to give you. And I took that basket with all the jars of the fruit in it and the jam, and I put it on her lap, and I shone the flashlight on it. And she just screamed. She says, where did you find it? I said, well, I followed the rat trail because I knew they had to eat too, and that's why they were going in that direction. And we ate just about everything in that basket. And then we felt pretty good. And then I knew where to go and get food, you see.
Oh, was this during the war, actually, that you're talking?
Oh, no, this was during the Russian occupation.
Oh, before the Americans received the
yes.
American sector.
The Russians were still coming into the American sector after it was finally decided that's where the Americans were, and the French and the British and the Russians were in East Germany. And when it was finally decided, we still had to be careful because they would sneak in and they would still rape and they would still steal and they would still abuse people. And you know, the silly thing was they didn't know what a toilet was. They didn't know what a water faucet was. And they took all that home with them. And they didn't even have running water in Russia at that time. And then finally, they set the rules down, and then there were no more Russians. We could go into the Russian zone, and they had all the food in the world, but you had to pay 3 times as much for it. I don't know where they got the food. And then we had a lot of food coupons, but we couldn't buy any food because there wasn't any food. So it was good to be free. Freedom is so important. And you can walk across the street and you don't have to fear, but there weren't any supplies for us. And you know, once in a while right now, with the situation the way it is in our country, it reminds me a little bit of some of those awful times that we experienced during the Second World War. And the killing and the burning and the ungratefulness and the fighting each other. It's so unnecessary because men might have plans, men might have many plans, but there's only one plan, and that's God's plan. And it always works the way he wants it to work. And that's what we have to remember, even in America right now. We have to remember that God is our leader.
Yes, thank you, Ingrid. How do you think you developed that kind of faith?
Excuse me?
How did you develop that kind of faith that you're talking about?
In East Prussia, you see, my mother never taught me much religion. In East Prussia, we had a very bad time. That's where we were evacuated. And I was staying with a family that mistreated me pretty bad. And I met another family, and I wanted to go and stay with them. So in the daytime, when we came home from school, I would go to the church, but I couldn't go to the Lutheran church because they always locked the doors in the daytime. So I went into a Catholic church, and I walked in, and it was very strange because I had never seen figurines like that, and the Mother Mary, and you had to kneel down and you had to cross yourself. So I came in and there was no one in there, but I heard voices. So I went to the front of the church and I knelt down and I prayed to my Heavenly Father. And I said, please take my life or take me out of here. I cannot stay in that house one more day. And all of a sudden, I heard a voice. I heard a voice, and I don't know if I heard it in my ears or in my soul. And I felt a hand on my shoulder. And the hand stayed there long enough to calm me down and promised me that I would be released from that family very shortly. And then I turned around and I reached for my shoulder and there was no one there. And then I was really confused. I thought, this is a strange church. They have invisible people. And then a priest came out of the confession booth. And he said, I heard every word you said. What had happened to you? He said, and you heard, what did you hear? Because you said you heard my voice. It wasn't my voice. What you heard was God's voice. He heard your prayers and he heard your plea. And he said he would help you and he will. And sure enough, 2 days later, I was with another family. And then I stayed with them until they sent all the kids back to Berlin. That's how I met God. He touched my shoulder. I can still feel it. And to this day, when I have a problem, I say my prayer and I put my hand on my shoulder and I said, please, Heavenly Father, I have a problem. And you know, he always listens. And he always shows me the way to solve my problem. That's
beautiful. That's beautiful, Ingrid.
7 years old.
Oh, yeah, that's beautiful.
Never have forgotten it. And you know, to this day, and I'm really in distraught and I'm lonely or depressed, it's difficult to live under the circumstances that we now have to live in. I pray and I feel his hand to this day. So I know, yes, there is a God. And I am maybe lonely, but I'm never alone because he is always there. And if more people, even in our country, would believe in God and serve God and serve each other and love one another, we wouldn't have the problems that we have right now.
Well, that's beautiful. Thank you. Just a couple of more questions. When did you come to the United States?
I came to the United States in 1959. Actually, it's a comedy because when I went to England first, I wanted out of Germany so badly when I found out what the Germans had done to the Jewish people in the concentration camps. I was almost ashamed to be a German, and I just wanted away from there. So my teacher in high school, she says, you can double up on your course and you can graduate early. And as soon as you graduate, you can go to England. They are looking for nurses to train. So that's exactly what happened. And I went to England, and I came back from England in 1952. And then I did all kinds of different jobs. And then I found out that my mother had an aneurysm on her heart, and I wanted to come home. So I came back to Berlin, and I was trying to find a job as a nurse, but they wouldn't accept my papers because it was a foreign country. So I found out that there was Tempelhof Air Base, and that's where they had jobs available. So I hiked all the way from where I lived to Tempelhof, and I got an appointment with somebody close to the offices quarter. You would know what that was. And I was interviewed, and they asked me, well, what do you know? And I said, well, I have the equivalent to junior college. I said, would you have a job for me? And they said, you know, we just happen to have an opening in base supply in Tempelhof on the American airport.
Wow.
And since you speak both of the languages so well, we would like for you to accept the job to be in charge of supplying all the air bases in the American occupied places in Europe. And you will be in charge of the stock file, and then you will contact them and make sure that they get the parts for their planes that they need. And that's where I was for 3 years. If I had waited 3 more years, I might have met the colonel then. So anyway, then I left there, and I met Mr. Gibson and the Wine Institute for the state of California. They were in Berlin for a vacation. And Mr. Gibson was the leader of the Wine Institute. And I took the ladies to go shopping because they didn't speak German. And I told them my biggest desire was to go to America. And they said, we will help you to come to America when we get back to our home country. And you know, 6 weeks later, I had taken all my shots. I had passed my test. They were very curious. They would not take you if you had been a hooker or something like that. So the American embassy gave me my stamp and my passport, and they said, okay, if you still want to go to America, you can go now. And I did. And I came to San Francisco, and that's where my American life started. And now I've been here since 1959. I've gotten to be an old lady, but I love America. It is my country, and you couldn't pry me out of here. You'd have to shoot me first.
Well, Ingrid, our time is about finished, and we really appreciate all of your memories and your thoughts. You have a book that you've written. If
Yes.
you could tell us the book, and then I have one more question for you. Tell us the name of your book.
The name of the book is Out of the Rubble, because from all the bombings, Berlin turned into rubble. And, but the name of the book, I had a very bad publisher that did not do me justice. He published 5 books and he called them all Out of the Rubble. Because my book was selling so well, he tried what he could. But anyway, I used my maiden name as the author. So it's Out of the Rubble by Ingrid Azvedo. And do you know, I wrote that book almost 5 years ago, and I'm still on Amazon. And a large honor was given to me a while back after I had my concussion. I had to stay home. I couldn't go to New Orleans because I couldn't fly. And a lady from New Orleans, from the American Second World War Museum, came to visit me here and interviewed me for 5 hours. And I now have my whole war story in the museum in New Orleans. So
That's
you see,
wonderful.
that was a big honor, and I'm very thrilled about that.
Yes.
Thank you.
Here's the last question. What impact do you think the events of the blockade had on your life then and now? The events of the blockade and the airlift. I know that's a big question.
Well, not really, because I could answer it very shortly. The blockade was awful. We had no food, we had no coal, we had no water. We were, like I said, we were badly off. And unless you worked on the black market, you couldn't get anything special. But when we started having the virus in America, it reminds me of the Second World War. Because sometimes it's difficult for me to get food. But it was my training in World War II that has now made me independent, because I can always find something in my house that I can create something out of. And the same problem is, of course, the water. I don't like the water that comes out of the faucet, and sometimes I run out of good water. But the Second World War was horrible. The bombings were horrible. The invasion of the Russian army was terrible. May America never have to go through that. And I learned something from my experience during the Second World War. I've learned to store food. I have a wonderful storage. And when I joined the Mormon Church, we were taught that we should do this. And I have stored food. I don't always eat what I want to eat, but your body only needs nourishment. So there were no jobs in the Second World War in Germany. All our men were in the war. Very few men came home from the war. They were either in coal mines in Russia or France, or they were killed. And a lot of German people, believe it or not, also died in concentration camps. If you spoke against Hitler, you were a dead duck. We were always watched. if there were more than 2 or 3 people in the street talking, it was like our virus now. We were told not to stand that close, and then they wanted to know what we talked about. We felt like we were in a prison during the Second World War. And sometimes I feel that way now, because I've been kind of locked up since my concussion in September. I really couldn't drive, and now I don't desire to drive. I've gotten too old to be on the road. I might not hurt myself, but I might hurt someone else. So I paid off my car, and I'm waiting for my pink slip so I can sell it and let somebody else enjoy it. It's a very nice car.
Well, thank you, Ingrid. Thank you for all of your wonderful words and your memories and your birthday greetings. Is there any last thing you'd like to say? I think our session is going to stop any minute.
Oh, it'll run out of time.
Pardon?
It runs out of time. So do you want to say?
My thing that I would like to repeat, as I said in the beginning, I would like to thank you, Father, from the bottom of my heart, for his sacrifice during the Second World War and the blockade. He probably never slept. I read your book. I read how he was always there for everyone else, and he still is. And that, to me, I think, is the most lasting memory. The fact that there was somebody that was a short time ago, was our enemy and bombing us, and now they were there saving our lives and protecting us and feeding us. And I thank you so very much, Colonel Harrison, for your sacrifice, for what you did for us, what all the American soldiers did for us. And I just hope and pray that we will get out of this mess that we're in right now and put America back on its feet again, because to me, it is the most wonderful, wonderful country on earth. And I want to live here until I die, and I want to be buried in American soil.
Thank you, Ingrid. We really appreciate you and the beautiful way you have of expressing yourself, and of the great care you've taken to record your memories in your book and to share what you know with so many people in your travels and your lectures. We appreciate you so much and want to wish you all the very best in your life.
I just want to tell you, I also got very involved in politics, and I worked for President Reagan. I had an appointment for the elderly for the whole country. And to me, like, he loves the children and I love the old people. So you see, when you stay involved and you see the needs and you reach in and you give people hope, and that's what you did for me. You gave me hope.
Yeah, hope is the magic word.
Hope is the magic word.
Yes.
I've really noticed that you Berliners find ways to serve with all your heart throughout your life. That's a quality that is there with all of
Yes, we do.
Yes.
And we do each other too, you know.
Mm-hmm. Yes, and thank you to your daughter-in-law, Jamie, for helping with this.
Oh, I'm so grateful for her. She has been my rock. She takes me to the doctor, and I had my concussion. I still have to go and see the doctor, and I'm having a small eye problem now, but that is getting better. And as soon as I'm strong again, I will find myself something to do which is useful.
Fantastic.
You will. Thank you for your time today, and thank you, Jamie. And we'll talk to you soon on the phone, I'm sure.
And thank you for interviewing me and taking the time. And thank you, my beloved Candy Mama.
You see that.
Jerome.
We love you.
Happy birthday.
Yes.
John, thank you.
Happy birthday.
Thank you so much, Denise.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Beautiful,
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
wonderful friends.